Hello, everybody. Chris Matthew with Forbidden Knowledge News. And as you can see, I'm here with the amazing author, researcher, world traveler, Brad Olsen. Brad, how you doing?
Doing great, Chris. Really
Well,
nice to meet you face to face.
oh,
Finally,
yeah,
we've done
it's
so
awesome.
many interviews over Skype, and now here we are.
Yes, it's great to meet everybody face to face. How are you enjoying the convention so far?
So far, so good. I was the first full presentation this morning, and I was glad to see a lot of people came out for it, and very interested in the subject in Antarctica, which I just came back from almost month-long trip. Almost 1 year ago, one year and a week ago, I was getting off the boat, and I'm glad that so many people are interested in this subject because there's a lot of mysteries down there, and I hope to have dispelled a few myths myself and brought out some new information that people may not have heard about.
Definitely, it was fascinating. And we've talked before about Antarctica. And one of the things that we haven't talked about, well, there's a few things that you brought up in your presentation. One thing I found fascinating was that there's 4 poles in Antarctica. Can you talk a little bit about that, what the different poles are?
Well, the geographic pole, we all know, that's the axis that the Earth spins on, just like the North Pole. A lot of people think that all compasses point to that pole, and they would be wrong because that would be the magnetic pole. And this has thrown off mariners since people have started sailing across the ocean because they would always assume that was the North Pole. That's just the axis it spins on. The magnetic North Pole is actually off the continent of Antarctica now, just in the same way that the magnetic North Pole is racing across the Arctic Ocean towards Siberia. Things are changing, and I kind of ran out of time, but I was going to talk a little bit about pole shifts, and I did show a slide at the end there of where the next poles could actually end up being. And Charles Hapgood wrote a book called Path of the Poles. Albert Einstein wrote the foreword to it. So that's interesting because the poles are on the move. The magnetic poles are on the move. You also have a geomagnetic pole, and that's the geographic magnetic pole, and that's where all the southern lights take place. And that's also where the Vostok station is, and where they're drilling down 2.2 miles under the ice to reach the mysterious Lake Vostok, which is one of the largest freshwater lakes in the world and has only been penetrated and discovered in 2012. So there's a lot of science that is moving very rapidly in Antarctica, and that's why the first half of my talk I discuss a lot of things that are going on down there with some of the research stations. But to finish your question about the 4 poles, then there's the pole of maximum inaccessibility, which is the point in Antarctica that is the most remote from any shoreline or any city or civilization or even a research base. And the pole of maximum inaccessibility is very difficult to reach, well, unless you fly there. Of course, you can just land on the polar plateau and go. But some people try to cross-country ski across the polar plateau. Some are successful if they're not going into these areas that are inaccessible, such as around the South Pole, where there is a giant no-fly zone and they won't even let you cross-country ski across it. Unless you're Prince Harry, because he did that. Yeah, you get the divine right to rule, then I guess you get to cross-country ski wherever you want to go.
I would imagine. And a lot of the elites actually visit Antarctica under very mysterious reasons. You know, you can't get much information, especially when you have political leaders going down there. You don't hear exactly the reasons they're going down there. It's very mysterious, and a lot of the elites, it seems like some kind of elite Disneyland down there or something.
Well, yeah, that we call it the Illuminati Disneyland because they are going down to see something.
Yeah,
it would seem. And often they'll disappear for a couple days, like John Kerry and we think Buzz Aldrin went off the itinerary and just, where'd they go? Nobody knows. Maybe to some of these under ice bases, which are presumed to be down there, which Corey Good says he has visited. Wish there was photographs instead of artist representations. But that's why I put it in the second half of my talk about what is speculated that's down there. And while I'm still collecting data points to put together to try to verify some of these claims, some pan out more than others, and other photos that I've collected turned out that I can pretty much say they're fakes. So there's disinformation regarding what's down in Antarctica, and then there's a lot of hard science that's also happening. And some of the things they're finding are absolutely mind-blowing, such as the meteorites with microbial life from Mars, which was
ask you about that.
which was called the very first verification that extraterrestrial life has come to this planet, even though it's very much microscopic in size. But nonetheless, it opens the door to the slow drip of lowercase d disclosure in the mainstream media. We know a lot has accelerated since then with the Tic Tac videos, and now the Navy acknowledging for the first time that a lot of these videos are actually authentic. So you're getting disclosure in a different kind of way. But the fact that it started in Antarctica with this microbial life coming from Mars is pretty interesting. So some of this hard science is going down there, as well as the cosmic rays coming out of the Earth at a 30-degree angle. Even the stuff that's even making it into the mainstream media is still pretty mind-blowing what's going on down there.
Yeah, you just mentioned the cosmic rays coming out of Antarctica.
Right.
That is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit more about that.
So this is a fairly recent discovery. They have a program at the Amundsen Scott South Pole Station called Ice Cube, and they're putting highly sensitive sensors into the ice that can detect earthquakes from around the world, that can detect pollution or any kind of contaminants, which if they make their way all the way to the South Pole, then you know it must be global in scope. So they're also monitoring vibrations as far as volcanoes or earthquakes going off. And then they were putting up these balloons a couple years ago that were highly sensitive to many different types of forces. And that's when they detected the cosmic rays coming out of the Earth. And only at the South Pole, which is very interesting because that's where the no-fly zone is. And that's where Linda Moulton Howe's whistleblowers have said they've seen the massive hole in the ice, which could just be an entrance into some of these massive caverns under the Antarctic ice, or it could be an entrance into the hollow earth. And this is along the lines of what Admiral Byrd wrote in his diaries as far as flying a plane into it. I mean, the chasm was so huge, yes, he felt comfortable going into, circling around, and coming out of. So more mysteries and more questions than we have answers to many of these subjects, Chris.
Definitely. And you briefly mentioned just now the volcanoes.
Right.
Most people don't know how volcanic underneath our Antarctica is. I think it's something like 91 volcanoes under there.
That's right.
Ridiculous amount.
Sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. But yeah, if you could just talk about the volcanoes. I know you briefly mentioned it in your presentation.
Yeah. Hey, I'm doing an interview with Chris. Come on out to the table. There we go. Good enough. Yeah, 91 volcanoes that are known. Several fault lines that have volcanoes along the ridge of the Trans-Antarctic Mountains, which I showed. And because it's so geothermically active, the propensity to create these massive caverns or chambers under the ice large enough to hold a small city. And because of the geothermal activity, you have not only the ability to tap in for free energy, but you can have a heating source, and you can use it to turn a turbine, for example, and harness it in different ways. So that is why the Nazis chose the area near the Schumacher Ponds, which are geothermically active hot spring lakes that they discovered in the late 1930s and set up their Point 211, or the New Berlin base, not too far away, right along one of these fault lines. And the Germans, they never left after the war. I have maps from the Cold War period, and West Germany has their bases right there in New Schwabenland. Yeah. So they never pulled out entirely.
Definitely. Now, do you have, I believe you have plans on going back there in the future, right?
Well, I've been approached by some producers that want to produce some shows that have heard my interviews and talks on it. And if I were to lead the expedition, I would want to go to this New Schwabenland area. So we would come in via South Africa instead of South America, because each area of this massive continent that you want to go to, it's better to approach from New Zealand, South Africa, or South America. So in this case, to go to New Schwabenland would be coming in through South Africa corridor. And there are some research stations that we could get support from, but I would love to go in search of the New Berlin base with some Geiger counters to see if indeed they had been nuked back in the late 1950s under Project Argus, when the US was doing a lot of nuclear bomb explosions in the Southern Ocean, which really makes no sense that they would have to go so far away to do this, unless, of course, they were intent on taking out the New Berlin base once and for all with nuclear bombs. So that could be an undiscovered mystery if we went down there with a film crew. That, as well as going to the Conan base, which I showed pictures from Google Earth in 2013, there is something big under the ice there. And if we could somehow get access to that, that would be the craft under the ice. I would say that's my number one of all the other sites that I've identified that may have something strange and anomalous under the ice. That would be the place I'd want to go to. And that is not too far away from New Berlin.
Now, you showed a picture of that anomaly. How big would you estimate that is? And they covered it with a tarp now, right?
Correct. Yeah, you can still go to those coordinates that I gave and see all these points sticking out. I think there's about 20 of them, and that corresponds with the 20 ridges of the craft that could be seen in the Wayback Machine of Google Earth if you look back to 2013. And that's where I did the screen capture of that craft and the landing strip and some kind of activity that was going on that year. And then they covered it up with a tarp, and then the snow's blown over it, and all you can see are the tops of the tarp sticking out. But I would be sure that there'd still be some way to get back in there.
Right. Any idea of estimate how big that would be?
Yeah, you can kind of tell with the airstrip and the snowmobile track. I would put it at close to a quarter mile, pretty darn big. And you can even see like tiny specks, which might be people standing there or some equipment, and it's really small in comparison to the size of this thing.
Now, what other places would be the best places to search for some anomalies that have been speculated on in Antarctica?
Well, certainly around the South Pole, if there would be a chance to go explore around this no-fly zone. Apparently, the hole in the ice is not even that far away from the geographic South Pole, only 20, 30 miles away. You can't see it if you approach it from the other side, and I think that's why the base is where it is. But if it were possible to go explore around there, that would be great. Also, I've been offered the opportunity to join Brooks Agnew exploring the Arctic region to find the other hole in the ice, because there are two massive chasms that are entrances into this hollow earth, and he has the coordinates for it. So we're going to go looking for that in 2021 in the summer. And because of my experience in Arctic regions, I've been asked to be a co-discoverer,
Right.
co-leading this group with Brooks and a film crew, and maybe some other passengers on an icebreaker that we're going to take across the Arctic Ocean to get there.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that would be one of the best places to research, because the hollow earth, I think that theory is very compelling to me, because I think a lot of these extraterrestrials are possibly here on Earth, and they come from inside the Earth. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, that is one of the theories of where extraterrestrials come from, that they are not from faraway planets at all, that they are right here on Earth, living in some of these massive under-Earth chambers. And so they're called intraterrestrials. They're inner-Earth terrestrials that have been here all along. There's a good argument to be made that the reptilians are one of these races that have been here for a long time, because many of them have lived and breeded and had offspring here on Earth, that they can dodge this whole notion of a prime directive that extraterrestrials cannot interfere with the development of an emerging species like the humans are. So that's sort of their workaround, because they too are Earth-born, but they're not from here, and they have come here a long time ago. I know the time frames around 7,700 years ago, but humans have been here a lot longer. And then you have the proto-humans that came from Cro-Magnon, Homo erectus, that may have had some of our human DNA spliced. This is the emerging view of how humans came about, because in my book, Modern Esoteric, I talk about the blood of the gods, the Rh negative blood type. We were just talking to Kate Thorvaldsen about that a second ago, and my family is Rh negative blood. So it's very intimate to me. I've lost an uncle because his blood was incompatible with my grandmother. And this happens in no animal species. Only humans have this, where a mother can contaminate and kill its own offspring. So there's a lot of weird things about the human genome, especially our DNA, where about 90% of it is called this dark DNA or this ghost DNA.
Junk DNA.
Junk DNA. It's
Right.
given these derogatory names only because we're ignorant of what it might be and what it might do.
Definitely.
And I would suspect that has a lot to do with the spirit of our bodies and how that connects to DNA. And it's still yet undiscovered by modern science and DNA sciences.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I think that we're definitely some sort of hybrid race, and our DNA, I think, holds powers that those in control don't want us to find out about. I think we have more powers that we could ever imagine if we could harness the powers of our DNA, consciousness, things like that, that the powers that be don't want us to access. Wouldn't you agree?
I would totally agree, and that would be the secrets of the universe. That's esoteric knowledge in its finest form, Chris.
Yes,
I'm
definitely.
glad you've seized on that, because that is one of the big questions of who we are and what we're doing here on Earth, and more importantly, what our innate abilities might be, these superhuman abilities we read about in, for example, Paramahansa Yogananda wrote the book called Autobiography of a Yogi, and every chapter is about a different yogi, guru, master who has achieved superhuman abilities. So these are all latent inside each one of us, just like our pineal gland is calcified over and we don't use it, nor do we use this junk DNA, which could then access quite a few of these abilities. So this is what I'm very interested in, and I write about in my esoteric series of books, and I hope other people also gain a little of that enthusiasm.
Definitely. Well, Brad, it was great talking to you. What's your plans for the rest of the conference?
Well, I'm giving my Mysteries of South America talk on Tuesday, and that's a complimentary talk with Antarctica because both of those trips were together.
Right.
And then I'm on the esoteric panel with Johnny Enoch, Jordan Maxwell, who's sitting right here, and Jay Widener, who's coming to the event too. So I'm really looking forward to that and interacting with all the people here at UFO Megacon. It's a great selection of speakers and truth seekers who come to these conferences and want to gain more information, as do I. I'm here to learn as well.
Definitely. 100%. Thank you so much, Brad,
Oh,
for
thank
talking
you,
with
Chris.
us.
Always a
Looking
pleasure,
forward
buddy.
to your presentations.
Thanks, man.